Yank decided they wanted a correspondent in Moscow, and they were going to send me. And but being the Army, they couldn't cut me orders that said you're to go to Moscow and do this. They cut me orders that said, I still remember them, because I was to proceed to Tehran, what was then Persia, and such other places as are necessary for your mission. I was on the boat for 42 days. It was a Dutch freighter that used to make the run from Rotterdam to Java. It took a few passengers. There were some Mexicans who were going to Russia to form the legation there. There were a couple of Army engineers, me, and we went from New York to Philadelphia through the canal to Australia, and then on up to the Persian Gulf.
Wow.
42 days. You went crazy. And I reported, I was supposed to report it to the military attaché in Tehran and say, my orders, I'm supposed to go to Russia. And he just laughed. He said, you're not going to Russia. Nobody goes to Russia, from here. The Russians don't want you, and you want to write something, just stay here and write about the Army here. And so I was stuck there for about 6 weeks. It was quite miserable. It was very hot. And there was nothing to do, really. It was mainly service personnel. They sending Lend-Lease stuff up to Russia. And finally I got a call saying there was to be NBC was doing a radio program around the world, different Yank correspondents as it was the 1-year anniversary. And I was to go to Jerusalem and make the broadcast from there. That was great. I had these orders and that said I was to go, so this was my mission. So I flew, I remember very hungover, to Jerusalem and made the broadcast, and then I never went back. I kind of followed the war. North Africa and Sicily and Italy. And then I would go back to Cairo periodically because I got per diem in Cairo and nowhere else. I was there in Cairo when there was a press conference given by two officers, the partisans of Yugoslavia, they were led by Tito. And this was the first time anybody knew anything about them or what they were doing. And I thought that was a great story. They were under the guardianship of the British. And the British and the Allies in general didn't want any news about Tito to come out before the Second Front, the invasion, which was going to happen in June. This was now March or April, but they didn't know how to deal with Tito, who was a communist. And they were giving him guns and stuff because he was the only one fighting the Germans, but they were very leery about touting him anymore. I found out where they were staying, and which was a secret. They weren't supposed to, but I found some British sergeant who was a driver for them and got him drunk, and he told me, and I wrote them a letter and in which I made it very plain that I was also of a leftist persuasion, and therefore to be trusted by them. And I got an immediate response from them saying, come. And I went to see them. They were two of them. They were there for brain operations. They'd both been wounded. And one of them didn't speak any English, but the other one was fluent in English, a man named Dedier. they said, yes, we want as much publicity as possible, you know, and why don't you come to our country and you can meet Tito. And I said, great. They hid me. I took off my uniform and they gave me some clothes and they ferried me over to an island in the Adriatic, which was a little bit of a staging point. There was going to be a youth congress in Yugoslavia somewhere. The Germans held the cities and the towns, the bigger towns, and the partisans held the interior, the land. So we had a few firefights with German troops, but finally got to this mountain fastness where Tito was, and I got to interview him a couple of times, and I was going up to the front where there was fighting there, and one night I was heading there and I ran into a British officer, major. I had put on my uniform again, and he stopped. He said, well, who are you? You know, what are you doing here? You know, and I told him. He said, oh, he said, most irregular. He said, most irregular. You better come with me. And he took me up to this house where Randolph Churchill was. He was one of the people there. And I told him my story, and he got a big kick out of it. He thought that was very funny, but then he was very impressed by the New Yorker and stuff like that. He said, but, you know, stay here, and you're under arrest, basically. And they flew me out, and with Churchill one night, flew me back to Bari, where there was a very nice British captain waiting for me, and he was saying, we're taking charge of you because we don't want to see you terrorized by the Americans. And they flew me back to Algiers, where their American headquarters was, and I got interviewed by some general. And I really thought I was going to be court-martialed because they were very upset, because I had sent stories out to Yank, not to the New Yorker or any place, that Yank had printed about the partisans. And meanwhile, they had designated an American and a British correspondent from the pool there and given them parachute training and all, just to delay them. They were going to then let them in. And I got there first. And, you know, but this general, he said, well, we'll see what we want to do with you. And then this piece came out, really. And that helped me, you know, that they weren't going to court-martial me after that. What they did, though, was to hold up my piece, my pieces about Tito. Because what I'd sent back was mostly stuff from that island I was on. I hadn't written up the Tito interview yet. These correspondents were flown in, and I think the day after I left, the Germans dropped a couple of battalions of paratroopers on there, and Tito just got away. I got out in the late spring of 46, 5. I went to the New Yorker, who did what, I don't know whether they still do anything like that. They gave me a drawing account of $100 a week. And I was to write whatever, you know, reporters at large or something like that. And I was kind of paralyzed. I didn't know who I was. I had no experience of civilian life, really. And so mainly I just sat in the office they gave me, or I went off to the movies and didn't do much. But then I had a book published, which was a collection of the New Yorker war pieces and the Yugoslav piece. And it was received quite well. And on the basis, really, of the book, I got an agent and a Hollywood agent and a job offer to go out and work for 10 weeks with a writer, producer, director named Robert Rossen. And I was to work on a Chekhov story called The Grasshopper, I believe it was called. Anyway, I went out there for 10 weeks and I stayed 6 months. I did the 10 weeks with Rossen, really working with him on a movie called All the King's Men, rather than the Chekhov thing. He was writing the script for that.
Was this at Columbia or
that was at Columbia?
Yeah, you were at Columbia. So you were there when Harry Cohn.
Oh yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, at one point, Rossen wanted his desk moved from one place in his office to another. So he had one end and I had the other, and we were moving it around. When I saw this man, stocky, bald-headed man standing in the doorway, you know, and I remember what he said to Rossen. He said, Rossen, he said, he pointed to me, he said, who is this, one of your commie writers from New York? You know, and Rossen said, yes. And Cohn didn't care, you know, at all. He said, yeah, all right, but you're putting the desk in the wrong place. Go put it over there. It was interesting, you know, given what was going to come, you know, that he knew Rossen was a communist, or certainly very left. It didn't matter to him as long as he did the work, and he did what Cohn wanted him to do. At that point, there was no other pressure on Cohn to do anything. So I did the 10 weeks.
Is it fair to say that you learned how to put a script together with Rossen?
I learned a lot from Rossen. Mm-hmm. I learned a lot. Mm-hmm. And he had been there for, I don't know, 10 or 15 years, working at Warner's most of the time, you know, and he knew the nuts and bolts for it. He was talented. You know, he was a strange man, and I just kind of sat at his feet, you know. But I remember the things that I learned about writing movies. There was one scene he gave me to write, and I brought it back to him. It took about 2 pages, and I was very pleased with it. The dialogue was very good and whatever. You know, and he read it. He said, fine, it's nice writing. And he said, let me take it and see what I can do with it, you know. And he took it away, and it turned out in the movies to be all a reaction shot that said everything that those 2 pages had said, really, you know. And it was a very key point. It was the point where you were beginning to doubt who this Huey Long character really was. But he said, you don't need the 2 page, you know. And I liked them. I felt very happy with it. But I did learn from him.